None of us are blind to the horrors of the world we live in. Mankind is capable of all sorts of depravities, given the right blend of circumstance and choice. For the vast majority of us, being held in captivity is akin to a waking nightmare, and it's difficult to imagine being forced to endure horror after horror. Some victims of such crimes don't live to tell their tales, but some do. Join us for today's episode as we examine 3 cases of kidnapping victims who escaped their terrifying situations. Colleen Stan. Born December 31st, 1956, in Eugene, Oregon, Colleen Stan is often referred to as the girl in the box after suffering an extremely traumatic ordeal when she was captured at the age of 20 while attempting to hitchhike from her home in Eugene to her friend's birthday party in Northern California. On May 19th, 1977, Colleen was picked up by 24-year-old Cameron Hooker. She would later state that she'd felt confident getting into Cameron's van because he was with his wife, Janice, and their baby. When the couple stopped at a petrol station and Colleen left to use the toilet, she recalled feeling like she should leave, quote, run and jump out a window and never look back. But she ignored her gut feeling and went back to the car. The group moved on together to an isolated area off the highway where Cameron claimed to want to explore some caves. Instead, while Janice and the baby got out to play, he held a knife to Colleen's throat, tied her up, and placed a 20-pound wooden box over her head, which saw her world plunged into darkness. Janice and Cameron had agreed shortly before the capture of Colleen that he could snatch a young woman who got his attention and use her as a sex slave. This was reportedly because Janice, up until this point, had been the subject of Cameron's bondage fantasies. Over the next 7 years, Colleen was held captive. At one point, she was even given a contract that she was forced to sign, in which she agreed to become their slave for the rest of her life. She was disallowed to speak, dehumanized, referred to only as the letter K, and sexually abused, tortured, and beaten. The Hooker family eventually moved into a mobile home in Red Bluff, California, where Colleen was kept locked in a box beneath the couple's bed for 23 hours a day. Colleen would later explain that she had been convinced an organization named The Company was watching over her, and that harm would come to her family if she attempted to flee. The fear of this supposedly powerful organization was what prevented her from attempting to escape in the subsequent years. Instead of trying to leave, she figured that her best shot at survival would be doing everything she was asked. This eventually allowed her to go out for a jog, work outdoors, and help raise Cameron and Janice's children. She still didn't go for help, however, even when the door was open, the neighbors were around, and she had access to the telephone. She was even allowed to visit her family in 1981, but declined to divulge any information about where she'd been. Her family thought she was part of a cult and didn't press matters for fear of pushing her away. When she visited them again, Cameron was with her. He subsequently worried that he'd given her too much freedom, and she was forced to live once more in the box beneath the bed he shared with his wife. Colleen later recalled, "Anytime I was taken out of the box, I never knew what to expect. Fear of the unknown was always with me, as I was kept in the dark, both physically and mentally." 2 years later, Colleen's sort of freedom was returned to her. She was allowed back outside, and even permitted to get a job at a local motel, where she worked as a maid. In 1984, Janice began to struggle with the situation. She reportedly spoke with a pastor at her church, which led her to realize that she had been in the wrong in this situation. She also realized that she, too, had been subject to abuse, objectification, and torture at the hands of her husband. She decided to inform Colleen that Cameron was not part of the company and took her to a bus station where Colleen contacted her family so they could send her money for a bus ticket. Colleen also contacted Cameron to tell him that she was leaving. He reportedly began to cry. She then climbed aboard the bus and traveled home. Despite having made it back home, Colleen did not initially tell her family or the police about what she'd been through for the last 7 years. In fact, she continued to keep in touch with Cameron at his wife's request, as Janice seemed to want him to admit the error of his ways and turn his life around. But 3 months later, Cameron showed no sign of change, so Janice reported him to the police and informed them that he'd killed another girl, Marie Spanek, who'd gone missing in 1976. Marie's body has never been recovered, and since there was no physical evidence, authorities were unable to press charges. They did, however, charge Cameron with various sexual assault offenses, as well as kidnapping in Colleen's case. He was convicted of his crimes and given 104 years in prison. Janice was given immunity in exchange for her testimony and has since gone on to become a social worker. Colleen attempted to live a normal life after Cameron was put in prison, but it was not smooth sailing. She attended university and underwent years of therapy, but also ended up with a string of failed marriages. She gave birth to a child who was described as trouble and ultimately wound up in prison. In 2016, she was in her 4th marriage and was raising her toddler-aged grandson and was simply happy to be alive, noting, "Your life is just kinda in limbo when you're in captivity, and once you get that freedom back and you have that choice again, it's just like the gates open and you just run for it." When asked how she survived her horrific ordeal, Colleen stated, "I learned I could go anywhere in my mind. You just remove yourself from the real situation going on and you go somewhere else. You go somewhere pleasant around people you love, whatever makes you happy." Tina Marie Risico. Christopher Bernard Wilder, better known as the Beauty Queen Killer, was an Australian-American serial killer who terrorized the US beginning in 1984. Known to capture young women and girls, Wilder posed as a photographer and would lure his victims in before subduing them. They would subsequently suffer horrific violence, including rape and torture, before Wilder killed them. On April 4th, 1984, 16-year-old Tina Marie Risico was applying for jobs in the Del Amo Fashion Center in Torrance, California, when she was approached by Wilder, who had cameras around his neck. Wilder, then 39, complimented the young girl and told her about his non-existent modeling agency. He gave her his information and claimed he could make her a model and lead her to a life of luxury. In 2024, Tina opened up about her experience for the first time in 40 years. She reflected on the decision she made that day to get into a vehicle with a strange man, noting, "This is the one point that I regret every second of my life, every day. Why didn't I listen to my instincts? Why didn't I listen to the voice in my head? Don't get into a car with a stranger." But as a 16-year-old, Tina was convinced. He gave a good speech and seemed confident and even charming. The pair drove off together, with Wilder eventually pulling onto the side of the road in the Anaheim woods. In a secluded and forested area, Wilder's demeanor completely shifted. He pulled out a gun and instructed Tina to undress. She later recalled, "He taped my face, put sunglasses on me, and put a hat on me. And this time he was escorting me to the car. Like, now I feel captive. I was feeling fear, desperation, anxiety." Wilder drove the teenager to a hotel where she was forced to engage in sexual acts with the 39-year-old. He would go on to torture her using a knife as well as electric shocks. Tina observed that she felt entirely helpless at this time, adding, "Helplessness is an awful feeling. Then all of a sudden you realize your civil rights and your whole morality is being taken and controlled by somebody else. And in order to survive, you have to obey. And I didn't like it, but I had to deal with it." A week later, Wilder brought Tina to Gary, Indiana, with every intention of using her to help lure in his other victims. Tina recalled going up to a girl, telling her how beautiful she was, and explaining that there was a modeling show going on in the shopping center. Wilder would then intervene and say to the girl what he said to Tina just 7 days earlier. He lured the girl into his vehicle by claiming they needed to get more clothes from his warehouse. But in the car, Wilder pulled a gun on the girl, named Dawnette Sue Wilt, another 16-year-old. The trio then drove to a motel where both Dawnette and Tina were abused. Wilder instructed Tina to take a bath while he used electric shocks to abuse his new victim. Fortunately, Dawnette survived her encounter with Wilder. He took her into the woods and attempted to suffocate her before stabbing her twice and abandoning her. But Dawnette managed to get to a nearby road and flagged down help. Still, Tina remained in captivity. In Victor, New York, Wilder came across 33-year-old Beth Elaine Dodge, who he forced into a car. He had his teenage victim follow in Beth's vehicle. Tina later stated, the minute she got out of the car with him, he told her to walk ahead, and he just shot her in the back. After taking Beth's life, Wilder took Tina to the Boston airport, purchased her a plane ticket home, and left. She went to the police upon returning to California and told them everything she knew. Wilder, meanwhile, headed north. On April 13th, while in New Hampshire, he got into a scuffle with law enforcement officers who recognized him and was ultimately killed. To this day, Tina struggles with the notion that she survived while others did not, stating, "Why did I survive and they didn't? I don't know." She added that her compliance likely helped her survive. "I never screamed, I never retaliated, I succumbed, and, was vulnerable to him. I don't like playing games, but it was a game. I'm gonna survive in playing this game." She also theorized that her violent upbringing enabled her to endure, noting that her mother often hung about with members of motorcycle clubs and that sexual abuse was not new to her. "There's something inside of me that knew how to play along." Mary McElroy. Born November 25, 1907, in Kansas City, Missouri, Mary McElroy was the daughter of Henry Francis McElroy and his wife, Marie Orbison. Henry was a prominent local figure and politician, the first city manager of Kansas City, who took office in 1926, meaning that the entire McElroy family was recognizable and known for its power and wealth. And this is why, in 1933, they became the targets of a ransom demand. On May 27, 1933, 4 men broke into the family home, forcing their way in while waving around a sawed-off shotgun and donning masks. They made their way to the room of 25-year-old Mary, who was bathing. The men allowed her to dry off and get dressed before forcing her to come with them, ushering her into their vehicle outside. New York Daily News reported that when told they were going to demand $60,000 in exchange for her safe return, Mary replied, "I'm worth more than that." By all accounts, she did not take the situation seriously at all, seeming rather blasé about what was happening. After blundering into their vehicle, the men drove to a farmhouse in Shawnee, Kansas, which one of them owned. Mary was subsequently chained to a wall in the basement, and the assailants made their ransom demand, warning Henry McElroy that the deal was off if he contacted the police or the media. If he did not meet their demands, Mary would be killed. When Henry informed them that he only had $30,000, they hung up. However, in a second phone call, they agreed to the proposed sum of money and gave Henry instructions on how to deliver it. Mary was released just 29 hours after she was captured. A short while after the ransom exchange had been made, she was left near the Milburn golf course with a bandana tied across her eyes and 2 roses in her hands, which she later wore in the lapels of her suit when she spoke with the media. Unlike how you might picture many victims of kidnappings, Mary was calm, collected, cool, like she'd simply gone out with friends and lost track of time, and the frenzy was for nothing. She noted that the men who'd taken her had been very kind during her time in captivity, disregarding that they'd threatened her and chained her to a cellar wall. It didn't take long for the culprits to be found. Walter McGee, a 37-year-old ex-convict from Oregon, was the first to be captured. He was discovered in Texas with $9,000 in bills, the serial numbers matching those on the ransom money. A few hours into his interrogation, McGee revealed everything, including the names of his accomplices, his brother George, as well as Clarence Stevens and Clarence Glick. The four men had been drinking one night when they began discussing the idea of taking someone for ransom, and their target became Mary McElroy. The remaining members of the group, except Clarence Stevens, who remained at large, were rounded up and arrested, and the home where they kept Mary captive was located. Upon entering the cellar to confirm that it was where she'd been held, the 25-year-old collapsed to the ground. Walter McGee went on trial in Jefferson City in July of that year. While talking to reporters beforehand, Mary McElroy's tone seemed light and breezy. Quote, "I don't believe I'd like to see any of those men go to the penitentiary. They treated me with such consideration. I have no malice towards them. They were just businessmen." However, her demeanor completely changed when she was questioned in court, with reporters describing her as embarrassed and shame-riddled. She told the court that prior to her release, she had been ordered by McGee to strip naked to check that she wasn't hiding any evidence, but noted that she had refused and he had not forced her. In the book, The Kansas City Investigation, Pendergast's Downfall, 1938 to 1939, Rudolph Hartman wrote that Mary had also struggled to identify the perpetrators in court and continued to insist that she had been treated well. She later met with the men's families and expressed nothing but support and sympathy for them. On February 10, 1934, 9 months after the incident, Mary is believed to have suffered some sort of breakdown. She vanished from her family home and was found to be in Springfield, Illinois, where she sent her father a telegram. It read, "Sorry, but I am so frightened. I don't know what I'm doing." Mary was soon located in the town of Normal, Illinois, and she was returned to the safety of her father shortly afterwards. When asked where she'd been, she struggled to articulate how she felt, explaining, "I felt like a murderer. I wanted to get away. I couldn't stand sitting still." Reporters indicate that following the ordeal, Mary's friends abandoned her, and she was ridiculed up and down the country. Her staunch defense of McGee caused rumors to emerge that she had had some sort of romance with her captors. She reportedly joked to her father about what she'd been through to try and lessen his burden. Henry was known for being lenient with criminals, so there were some who felt that his daughter's abduction was his own fault, but his reputation had been damaged further when it was discovered that the ransom had been reimbursed with city funds. Walter McGee was ultimately convicted on March 10, 1935, sentenced to death by hanging. This harsh punishment had come at the insistence of the DA, who wanted to make an example of him. McGee was the first kidnapper to be sentenced to death in the history of the US. His execution date was set for May 10th, which prompted Mary to fight against the death penalty and attempt to pull favors, which would see McGee's sentence commuted to life in prison. In April, she wrote to the governor, stating, "Walter McGee's sentence has hung as heavily over me as over him. Through punishing a guilty man, his victim will be made to suffer equally. In pleading for Walter McGee's life, I am pleading for my own peace of mind." Henry McElroy supported his daughter's beliefs, and on May 7th, McGee was granted a stay of execution. Mary frequently visited both the McGee brothers and Clarence Glick in prison. By all accounts, Mary struggled to adjust to life after the kidnapping, and she went on to suffer several nervous breakdowns in the subsequent years. She continued to live with her father, and after his 1939 death, she became reclusive. On January 21, 1940, she was found dead in her bedroom by a maid, having taken her own life with a small handgun. Her suicide note read, quote, "My 4 kidnappers are probably the only 4 people on Earth who don't consider me an utter fool. You have your death penalty now, so please give them a chance. Mary." Reportedly, the evening before, she had called a few friends and asked them to spend time with her. They had all declined. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.